I was 90 lost in the screams of Dimmu Borgir when I first felt the pull of something darker than music. A world where pain was real, where blood wasn't just a lyric, but a promise. By the time I met Toby, I was already drowning in it. But I didn't know how deep the abyss went until he showed me its edge. The first time I heard Blood Hunger Doctrine, it wasn't just a song, it was a wound. I was 16, holed up in my brother's room in our cramped Sheffield flat, the walls papered with posters of Metallica and Slayer. His CD collection was a treasure trove, and I'd sneak in when he was at work, flipping through scratched cases, until I found Dimmu Borgir's puritanical, euphoric misanthropia. The cover, a hooded figure in a desolate, frost-bitten landscape, felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I slipped it into the stereo, turned the volume low, and let it rip me apart. The guitars weren't just heavy, they were cataclysmic, a wall of sound that shook my bones. The vocals, raw and guttural, weren't singing. They were summoning something ancient, something furious. It wasn't like the pop-punk my mates blasted, all whiny heartbreak and catchy hooks. This was different. It was rage, despair, a rejection of everything the world told me to be. I lay on the floor, eyes closed, letting it fill me. This is what I've been missing. By 19, I was all in. Black metal wasn't just music. It was a way of life. I'd grown my hair long, traded my school hoodies for a second-hand leather jacket, the kind that creaked when I moved. I spent hours online reading about the Norwegian scene, the birthplace of this unholy sound. Bands like Mayhem Burzum, Emperor, they weren't just musicians. They were outlaws, burning churches, spilling blood, living the chaos they sang about. I read about Mayhem's Euronymous stabbed to death by Varg Vikernes over a royalties dispute that turned into death threats. The police found explosives in Varg's house, a stockpile for some imagined war. As a teen, I didn't flinch at the violence. I thought it was real. Not the sanitized rebellion of mainstream bands, but something raw, untamed. They don't just talk about pain. They live it. I'd sit in my room, headphones on, imagining myself in those Norwegian woods, far from Sheffield's gray streets, and my dad's endless lectures about getting a proper job. Black metal was my escape, my middle finger to a world that felt like a cage. Feel that pull, that hunger for something more. I started hanging out at the Dove and Rainbow, a metal pub where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the stench of stale ale. It was a Tuesday night ritual, the black metal crowd gathering like a coven. The regulars weren't like my schoolmates, who thought Slipknot was the pinnacle of heavy. These guys were different, tattooed, scarred their eyes, carrying stories they didn't tell. I'd sit at the bar nursing a pint, trying to blend in. But I was still a kid, too eager, too clean. That's when I first heard about the culture, the real heart of black metal. It wasn't just about the music. It was a rejection of everything modern. Cities, with their neon lights and concrete boxes, were prisons. The woods, the mountains, the cold, that's where we belonged. Fans talked about it like a religion, whispering about Satan, about blood, about burning away the lies of society. I soaked it up, every word, feeding the anger I'd carried since I was old enough to know I didn't fit in. One night, I overheard two guys at the pub talking about a gig in Leeds, some underground band nobody'd heard of. They were drunk, their voices low, but I caught fragments, something about a fight after the show, a knife blood on the pavement. That's what it means to be real, one said, his eyes gleaming. I didn't know if it was true, but it didn't matter. It felt true. That's what black metal was, a world where the line between art and violence blurred, where the darkness wasn't just a pose. I started collecting records, spending every penny from my part-time job at a warehouse on vinyl and patches. My room became a shrine. Mayhem posters, a Burzum flag, a cracked mirror I'd painted with corpse paint designs. I'd practice in front of it, smearing white makeup across my face, black around my eyes, trying to look like the bands I worshipped. It wasn't just a costume. It was armor, a way to shed the kid who got picked on at school and become something else. But it wasn't enough. I wanted more than records and makeup. I wanted to live it, to feel the chaos in my veins. That's why the dove and rainbow became my church. I'd sit there, listening to the older guys spin stories about gigs in Oslo, about bands who'd burned churches to ash. They talked about Varg like he was a god, not a killer. He did what he believed. One said, his voice reverent. I nodded, even though part of me wondered if I was in too deep. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when the music stops being sound and becomes a pulse in your blood. I started going to gigs, small venues, where the air was so thick with sweat and smoke, you could barely see the stage. The crowds were wild bodies, slamming fists flying. I'd come home with bruises, my ears ringing, feeling alive for the first time. But there was always a shadow, a sense that some of these guys weren't just playing at Rebellion. They meant it. I remember one night, a gig in a basement club, the band screaming about death and fire. A fight broke out, 2 guys swinging bottles, blood mixing with spilled beer on the floor. The crowd didn't stop it. They cheered like it was part of the show. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, not sure if I was scared or thrilled. That's when I knew black metal wasn't just music. It was a world where rules didn't apply, where violence wasn't just a lyric, but a way of life. By the time I was 23, I'd been fully converted. I wasn't just a fan, I was part of the scene, or so I thought. My schoolmates had drifted away, calling me weird for my obsession. But I didn't care. I had the pub, the music, the nights spent arguing about which album was truest to the spirit of black metal. I'd found my place, or at least I thought I had. Then I met Toby. He wasn't like the others, with their loud talk and cheap tattoos. Toby was quiet, intense, his presence like a storm waiting to break. He didn't need to shout about being a fan, he lived it. His leather jacket was patched with bands. I'd only read about his boots scuffed from nights I could only imagine. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was loud, but because his words carried weight, like a blade hidden in a sheath. I didn't know it then, but meeting him was the first step toward Bloodstock, toward that night in the trees when everything would change. I didn't know how deep the darkness ran, not just in the music, but in him. In me. The first time I saw Toby, he wasn't just a man. He was a shadow, a storm trapped in human skin, his eyes burning with something I couldn't name. I thought he was the key to the world I'd been chasing. But that night, at the Dove and Rainbow, I didn't know I was shaking hands with my own destruction. It was a Tuesday, in late 2005, the air in Sheffield heavy with winter's bite. I was 19, still new to the black metal scene, my leather jacket stiff and unscarred, my long hair barely reaching my shoulders. The Dove and Rainbow was my sanctuary, a grimy pub tucked in a back alley where the walls pulsed with the ghosts of 1,000 gigs. The neon sign flickered, casting a sickly glow over the street, and the air inside was a fog of cigarette smoke, stale ale, and something sharper, maybe sweat, maybe desperation. I pushed through the door, my boots sticking to the floor, and felt every eye in the room size me up. I was a kid among wolves, trying to prove I belonged. The jukebox was blaring Gorgoroth's Incipit. Satan the guitars, a jagged blade cutting through the chatter. The crowd was a mix of leather and denim tattoos, snaking up arms, piercings glinting in the dim light. I slid onto a bar stool, my pint glass sweating in my hand, and tried to look like I wasn't nervous. I'd been coming to these black metal nights for a few weeks, but I still felt like an outsider, a poser, waiting to be called out. The regulars were different, harder, their stories etched in scars and faded band patches. They didn't just listen to black metal. They lived. It breathed it, like it was the only thing keeping them alive. Feel that weight, that pull of something bigger. I was nursing my drink when the door swung open and the room shifted. Not physically, but you could feel it, a ripple like the air had thickened. He walked in, tall and lean, his black leather jacket patched with logos, Mayhem, Burzum, Darkthrone. His hair was a tangle of black falling past his shoulders, and his boots were scuffed, caked with mud, from places I could only imagine. He didn't look at anyone, didn't need to. The crowd parted, not out of fear, but respect, like he was a priest in this church of chaos. I didn't know his name then, but I'd heard whispers. Corpse Eater, they called him. He slid onto the stool next to me, his presence heavy, like a storm cloud settling in. "You're new," he said, his voice low, gravelly, like he'd smoked his way through a lifetime. He didn't look at me, just stared at the bar, his fingers drumming a rhythm only he could hear. I nodded, my throat tight, and mumbled something about Dimmu Borgir. His eyes flicked to me sharp and sunken, and for a second I thought he'd laugh or tell me to fuck off. Instead, he smirked. Good. Most of these pricks think Slipknot's metal. That was it. The moment I met Toby, he ordered a vodka, downed it in one gulp, and turned to me. You ever been to a real gig? Not this mainstream SHT. I shook my head, feeling small. He leaned closer, his breath sour with booze. Stick with me, kid. I'll show you what it means to be real. I didn't know what he meant, but I wanted to. I wanted to be like him, to have that weight, that certainty. See it in your mind, the way he carried the dark. Toby wasn't like the others at the pub, with their loud boasts and cheap tattoos. He was quiet, intense, his words measured but heavy, like each one was a stone dropped into a still lake. He didn't need to shout about Satan or burning churches. His presence screamed it. His eyes, shadowed under heavy brows, seemed to see through you, past the flesh, to something rawer. I'd catch him staring at the jukebox, or the wall, or nothing at all, and wonder what he saw. He told me about Norway. That first night, his voice low, almost reverent. It's where it all began, he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. The churches, the fires, the blood. You can feel it there in the air in the cold. He'd gone to Oslo, spent every penny on a ferry ticket from Newcastle via Amsterdam. He talked about the Holmenkollen Chapel, a place burned to ash by Varg Vikernes in the 90s, rebuilt by the time he got there. To him, it was a pilgrimage, a journey to the heart of black metal's rebellion. I listened, hooked, as he painted a picture of Norway snow, so deep it swallowed your boots, nights so cold your breath froze in your lungs. He'd slept in doorways, he said, begged for food stolen, what he couldn't beg. Nearly died out there, he said, his voice flat, like it was just a fact. But it was worth it. You don't know what you are until you're that close to the edge. I didn't believe him at first. It sounded like a story, something to make him seem bigger than the rest. But then he pulled out his phone, a battered Nokia, and showed me the photos. They were grainy, the kind of low-res shots you'd expect from a 2005 flip phone, but they were real. Toby hunched in an Oslo alley, his black beard crusted with snow, his eyes hollow, but alive with something fierce. Another shot showed him outside a rebuilt chapel, its wooden walls stark against the white ground, his face unpainted, but somehow more menacing than any corpse paint. I stared at the screen, my pint forgotten. This guy's not fucking around. I wasn't like the others at the pub who treated him like a god. They'd crowd around him, buying him drinks, hanging on his every word. Corpse eaters, been to Norway. They'd whisper, like it was a badge of honor. To them, he was a legend, a man who'd walked the path of Varg and lived to tell it. I was impressed, sure, but I didn't worship him. I just wanted to know him, to understand what made him different. You've felt it, haven't you? That pull toward someone who seems to know the truth. Over the weeks, we started talking more. Tuesday nights became our ritual. Me, Toby, and a revolving cast of misfits at the Dove and Rainbow. He'd sit at the bar, telling stories that blurred the line between fact and myth. One night, he talked about a gig in Bergen, some underground band nobody'd heard of. They played in a warehouse, he said, his eyes distant. No stage, just a circle of us screaming, bleeding. Some guy got his nose broken, kept singing through the blood. I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating, but his face stayed serious. You don't get it, do you? He said, leaning closer. It's not about the music. It's about what's inside you, what you're willing to do for it. His words hit me like a punch, not because they were profound, but because they were true. I'd felt it, the rage, the need to break something, to prove I wasn't just another kid from Sheffield. But there were moments that made me pause. One night, a guy at the pub, some poser in a brand new cradle of filth shirt spilled his drink on Toby's jacket. It was an accident, the kind of thing you laugh off. But Toby didn't laugh. He grabbed the guy's collar, yanked him close, and hissed something I couldn't hear. The guy's face went white, and he backed off, mumbling apologies. Toby let him go, but his eyes followed him. Cold and predatory. I brushed it off, told myself it was just the booze. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Another time, we were at my flat, blasting Mayhem's De Mysterious Dom Sathanas. Toby was pacing his boots, scuffing my carpet, ranting about the fakes in the scene. They sing about blood, but cry when they see it, he said, his voice low, dangerous. He pulled a knife from his bag, a small one, its blade chipped but sharp. He twirled it between his fingers, the metal catching the light. You ever cut someone? He asked, his tone casual, like he was asking about a gig. I shook my head, my stomach twisting. He smirked. You will. I told myself it was just talk, just the black metal bravado we all played at. But the way he looked at that knife, the way his voice dropped when he said it, it stayed with me. I started noticing other things, the way he'd go quiet when someone challenged him, not backing down, but biding his time. The way he'd disappear for days, then show up with a busted lip or a new tattoo, never explaining. He didn't work, didn't claim benefits, but always had cash for vodka or leather. When I asked where it came from, he'd snap, "Mind your own fucking business." I didn't push. I never did. Look closer. See the cracks in the mask. Toby was fun in his way. He'd drag me to gigs, small venues, where the air was so thick with sweat, you could taste it. We'd scream lyrics until our throats burned, shove our way through mosh pits, come home bruised and laughing. But there was always a shadow. I'd catch him staring at someone in the crowd, his eyes hard, like he was sizing them up. Once after a show, he vanished for an hour. When he came back, his knuckles were red, his jacket torn. Sorted some poser, he said, grinning. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. He talked about Norway, often, like it was a holy land. You don't understand. Until you've been there, he'd say, his voice soft but heavy. He described the cold, the way it sank into your bones, made you feel alive. He talked about the chapel, its rebuilt walls, a mockery of what it once was. Varg burned it, for a reason, he said, once his eyes gleaming. To show them we don't kneel. I nodded, caught up in his passion. But part of me wondered what he meant by we. The photos on his phone became a ritual. He'd pull it out after a few drinks, show me the same shots, him in the snow, him at the chapel. But there was one he didn't show, often a blurry image of him holding a knife. Not the small one I'd seen, but something bigger, its blade curved like a claw. Found it in Oslo, he said, his voice low. Some guy didn't need it anymore. I laughed, uneasy, and changed the subject. By the time he mentioned Bloodstock, I thought I knew him. I thought I understood him. He was my guide, my ticket to the world I'd been chasing. But every story he told, every glance he gave, carried a warning I ignored. Toby wasn't just a fan. He was a fuse, burning slow, waiting for the right moment to explode. The moment Toby said, "Bloodstock," my heart stopped. Not from excitement, but from the way his eyes burned, like he wasn't just inviting me to a festival, but to a reckoning. I thought it was my ticket to Valhalla, but as we drove toward Derby, his shadow loomed larger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. It was a Thursday night in July 2009, the air in the Dove and Rainbow, thick with the usual haze of smoke and sweat. I was 23, my leather jacket now worn, and patched my hair long enough to tangle in the wind. The pub was alive, the jukebox screaming Dark Throne's Transylvanian Hunger, its raw guitars slicing through the chatter. I was at the bar, half listening to a drunk regular rant about posers ruining the scene, when Toby slid onto the stool next to me. His presence was heavy, like a storm rolling in, and the room seemed to dim around him. "Got something for you," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the music. He leaned closer, his breath sour with vodka, and slid a crumpled flyer across the bar. It was for Bloodstock, a metal festival near Derby happening in mid-August. The lineup was a dream arch enemy, cradle of filth bands that could shake the earth with their riffs. My pulse quickened. I'd never been to a festival, not a real one. And Bloodstock was legendary, a pilgrimage for metalheads, 2 tickets. He said, his eyes glinting, "You in?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah," I said, my voice louder than I meant, drawing looks from the bar. Toby smirked, but it wasn't his usual grin. There was something sharp in it, something I couldn't read. "You pay for yours," he added, like it was an afterthought. "And get a tent. I ain't sleeping in the dirt." I nodded, too caught up in the idea of Bloodstock to care about the details, feel that rush, that hunger for the chaos. I handed over the cash the next day, every penny I'd scraped from my warehouse job. Toby took it without a word, his fingers brushing mine cold and rough. I borrowed a tent from a mate, a faded green thing that smelled of mildew, and begged my cousin Mark to drive us. He wasn't a metalhead, thought my music was just noise, but he owed me a favor. "You're mad," he said when I told him about Bloodstock. "That place is a show." I laughed it off, but his words stuck a splinter in my excitement. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. My flat was a mess, posters peeling off the walls, empty beer cans scattered across the floor. I lay on my bed, staring at a mayhem poster, Euronymous' face half hidden in shadow. I'd been dreaming of festivals like this since I was 16, sneaking into my brother's room to steal his CDs. Bloodstock was my chance to live the music, to be part of the chaos I'd only read about. But Toby's voice kept creeping into my thoughts, his stories about Norway, the knife he'd twirled in my flat, the way he'd stared at that poser in the pub like he wanted to gut him. I pushed it down. He's just intense. Toby was my friend, my guide into this world. He'd chosen me out of all the regulars at the Dove and Rainbow. That meant something, even if I suspected it was because I had a car and a tent. I packed my bag, leather jacket, corpse, paint, a bottle of cheap vodka, and tried to focus on the music, the crowds, the freedom waiting in Derby. See it in your mind, the road stretching out, pulling you toward something bigger. Friday. August 14th dawned gray and damp. Mark's van was a rust bucket, its engine coughing as we loaded the tent and bags into the back. Toby was already there, leaning against the van, his leather jacket creaking, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot, his beard matted. "Let's go," he said, climbing into the passenger seat like he owned it. I squeezed into the back, the tent digging into my ribs, the air thick with the smell of oil and stale smoke. The drive was long, the motorway a blur of gray concrete and green fields. Mark blasted some god-awful pop radio, and I caught Toby's scowl in the rearview mirror. "Turn that SHE off," he said, his voice low but sharp. Mark rolled his eyes, but switched to silence. I tried to lighten the mood, pulling out my MP3 player and offering Toby an earbud. "Dimmu Borgir," I asked, queuing up Spiritual Black Dimensions. He shook his head, staring out the window. "Save it for the festival," he muttered. "You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when the silence says more than words." Toby's mood was off, heavier than usual. He'd been quiet before, but this was different, like he was carrying something I couldn't see. I thought about the night at my flat months ago, when he'd pulled out that knife, twirling it, while ranting about fakes in the scene. You ever cut someone he'd asked his voice calm, like he was testing me? I'd laughed it off, but now in the van's dim light, that memory felt like a warning. I tried to shake it. "You been to Bloodstock before I asked?" Leaning forward, Toby didn't turn, just kept staring at the fields. "Couple times," he said. "It's raw, real. Not like those mainstream gigs full of posers." He spat the last word, his fingers tightening on his flask. He took a swig, the sharp scent of vodka filling the van, and offered it to me. I shook my head, my stomach already churning with nerves. He shrugged, drinking deeper, and I wondered what was fueling him, booze or something else. Mark broke the tension. "You two gonna survive out there?" he asked, glancing back at me. "Heard those festivals get wild? Fights, drugs, all that?" Toby's eyes flicked to him, coda and sharp. "We'll be fine," he said, his tone final. Mark didn't push, but I saw the way he gripped the wheel, like he was glad he wasn't staying. We reached Derby by noon, the festival grounds a sprawl of chaos. Cars were parked in muddy rows, their tires sinking into the wet earth. People hauled gear across the field tents, coolers, crates of beer, shouting and laughing, their voices mixing with the distant hum of guitars. The air was alive, electric heavy, with the smell of mudweed and anticipation. Bloodstock's gates loomed ahead, flanked by banners of snarling demons and band logos, their colors faded but fierce. Feel that pulse, the call of the music. Mark pulled over his van, rattling to a stop. "You're on your own now," he said, clapping my shoulder. "Don't do anything stupid." I grinned, but his words echoed stupid, like following Toby into the unknown. We grabbed our gear, the tent heavy on my back, and trudged toward the gates. Toby strode ahead, his boots sinking into the mud, his jacket creaking with every step. I followed my heart, pounding, not just from the weight of the bags, but from the weight of what was coming. We set up camp at the edge of a field where the grass gave way to a wall of trees. The forest was dense, its branches twisted like claws, casting long shadows over our tent. On the other side, a sea of nylon tents stretched out their colors, clashing red, blue-green, dotted with campfires and clusters of metalheads. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint tang of burgers frying at a nearby van. I drove the tent pegs into the ground, my hands shaking from excitement or nerves, I couldn't tell. Toby stood at the edge of the trees, staring into the dark. "Good spot," he said, his voice low. "Close to the wild." I didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it, quiet, almost reverent, sent a shiver down my spine. I thought of his stories about Norway, sleeping in the cold, surviving on nothing but will. Was this what he wanted? To be out here away from the crowds, closer to whatever darkness he carried. We finished setting up the tent, sagging slightly under the weight of its own age. Toby pulled out his flask, took another swig, and offered it again. This time, I took a sip, the vodka burning my throat, hoping it would drown the unease growing in my gut. "This is it, mate," Toby said, his eyes gleaming. "Our fucking Valhalla." I nodded, caught up in his energy. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I didn't understand. You've been there, haven't you? That moment when the excitement feels like fear. We wandered the festival grounds, the stages already alive with sound. Bands I'd only heard on CDs were here, their music shaking the earth. The crowd was a living thing, leather jackets, corpse paint, fists raised to the sky. I was buzzing my blood, singing with the promise of the weekend. But Toby's shadow followed me, his silence louder than the music. I told myself it was nothing, just the booze, just the vibe. But as we moved toward the main stage, his eyes kept drifting to the trees, like he was waiting for something or someone. The forest swallowed the festival's light, and Toby's voice, slurred with a glee I'd never heard, pulled me deeper into the dark. When he turned, the knife in his hand gleamed, and I saw it, not my friend, but a monster wearing his face, ready to carve my life away. The night was heavy, the air thick with the scent of mud and smoke. It was August 15th, 2009, my second night at Bloodstock, and the festival's roar had faded to a distant hum. I was 23, my boots caked with dirt, my corpse paint smudged from a day of sweat and chaos. I'd spent hours searching for Toby. After our fight at the Cradle of Filth set my voice hoarse from calling his name, my chest tight with disappointment. The crowds, the music, the energy, I'd craved it all, felt hollow without him. I trudged back to our tent, the field a maze of guy ropes and flickering campfires, hoping he'd be there, hoping we could fix whatever had broken. The tent was unzipped, the flap swaying in the breeze, a sign someone had been inside. Toby. My heart lifted, then sank when I saw it was empty. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling, ready to try his number again, when a voice cut through the dark. "Mate." It was Toby calling from the trees bordering our camp. His voice slurred but sharp-edged with something unnatural. Relief flooded me, mixed with a chill I couldn't name. I stepped toward the forest, the festival's lights fading behind me, the ground uneven under my boots. "Toby, where the hell you been?" I called, trying to keep it light. Feel that dread, the way it creeps into your bones. I apologized for our fight, the words spilling out, desperate to smooth things over. "Didn't mean to lose it, mate. We good." He didn't answer right away, his silhouette barely visible in the moonlight, his corpse paint glowing faintly. "Forget it." He said his words thick, like he was chewing them. "All good." But his tone was wrong. Too eager, too bright, a manic edge I'd never heard. "Listen, I found something. You gotta see it. What is it?" I asked, squinting into the dark. He laughed a sound that sent ice down my spine. A surprise. My stomach twisted, but I followed, drawn by some stupid loyalty, the same pull that had kept me tethered to him for months. The forest was a different world, the trees swallowing the festival's noise, the air cold and heavy, with the scent of pine and damp earth. Toby moved ahead, his steps unsteady, but purposeful, his leather jacket creaking with each movement. I wanted to turn back, to stay in the safety of the tents, but I kept going, my boots sinking into the mud, my heart pounding louder than the distant drums. "You've been there, haven't you?" That moment when instinct screams to run. I thought of a night at my flat months ago when Toby had pulled out that knife, twirling it while ranting about posers. "You ever cut someone?" he'd asked, his voice calm, testing. I'd laughed, but the memory now felt like a blade against my throat. "What kind of surprise?" I asked again, my voice tighter, the darkness pressing in. He didn't answer, just mumbled words I couldn't catch, except for fucking posers and fakes. He stopped by a tree, knelt, and picked something up from the ground. I squinted, expecting a bottle, maybe drugs he'd stolen. But when he stood and turned, unwrapping a cloth bundle, my breath caught. A knife gleamed in his hand, long, curved, gothic, its edge catching the faint moonlight. "Cool," I said, my voice hollow, my brain sluggish from booze and exhaustion. "Where'd you get that?" His face twisted, not with pride, but with a terrifying resolve. His eyes empty, consumed by something I couldn't name. His breathing grew heavy, ragged, the knife trembling in his grip. He's not showing me. He's going to use it. See it in your mind. The blade's cold glint. "Mate, what the fuck are you doing?" I stepped back, my heart slamming against my ribs. He didn't answer, just lunged the knife, slicing the air with a vicious hiss. I stumbled, dodging his wild swing, the world narrowing to the glint of steel and the pounding in my chest. "Toby, stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking as I backed away, tripping over roots and tent ropes. He kept coming, his movements jerky, his eyes locked on me like a predator. I screamed again, desperation clawing at my throat, my boots slipping in the mud. The festival was alive around us. Hundreds of people in circles, laughing, drinking, but they felt miles away. Faces turned eyes, widening as they saw the blade. I shouted for help, my voice raw, and a man stepped forward. His mohawk tied back his voice, calm but firm. "That's a big knife, mate. Hand it over before someone gets hurt." Toby spun, slashing at him, the blade catching his arm. The man staggered back, blood seeping through his fingers, his face pale with shock. "You're gonna cut me?" he yelled, clutching his wound. I tripped my leg, catching on a rope, and fell hard, the ground cold against my back. I'm dead. Toby loomed over me. The knife raised his face, a mask of paint and rage, the fake blood mixing with sweat, dripping onto the dirt. Time slowed, every detail burning into my mind. His ragged breath, the red streaks on his chin, the way the blade gleamed like a promise of death. But before he could strike, a crowd surged forward. Men, women, even a tiny girl, barely 5 feet, screaming defiance. "Come on then," she yelled, her voice sharp, fearless. Feel that chaos. The crowd closing in. They circled him, a wall of bodies, dodging his wild swings, landing kicks and shoves. Toby spun, slashing blindly, but they were relentless. Hit and retreat. Hit and retreat. A kick sent him staggering. A shove dropped him to the ground. Then they were on him. A chaos of fists and boots, shouts, mixing with the festival's distant roar. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking, torn between fear for myself and fear for him. He's my mate. But he wasn't not anymore. Security stormed in, torches, blinding voices, barking orders. "Get back." The crowd scattered, some running. Others lingering, their faces a mix of shock and anger. I saw Toby bloodied and cuffed his face, a mess of paint and bruises, his body limp as a cop locked his wrists. Medics swarmed, tending to the wounded, 3 or 4 cut in the chaos, including the Mohawk guy, who was cursing his arm, wrapped in a makeshift bandage. A cop approached me, his notepad out. "You're the one he went for." I nodded, my throat tight, my lip still bleeding from our earlier fight. I told him everything, our scuffle at the cradle. Set Toby's strange behavior, the knife. "Drugs?" he asked. I hesitated, my instinct to protect Toby warring with the truth. "Probably," I said, though I wasn't sure. Drugs didn't explain this. I thought of the stories he'd told about Norway, about blood, about the chapel he'd worshipped. He'd always glorified violence, his words laced with a hunger I'd ignored. I'd seen it, felt it, but never thought it would turn on me. The cop scribbled notes, his face unreadable. I glanced at Toby now on a stretcher, his eyes open, but staring at nothing. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why, but the words wouldn't come. The festival carried on, the music a distant pulse, but for me, it was over. I packed my tent, drove home, the road blurring through my tears. You've felt it, the weight of betrayal. Back in Sheffield, the black metal scene turned on me. The Dove and Rainbow became a place of whispers and glares. They didn't say it outright, but I felt their blame. I'd gotten Toby arrested. They cared more about his trial than the fact I'd nearly died. One girl, a regular, with a Burzum tattoo, cornered me. "You didn't have to snitch," she said, her eyes cold. I explained it wasn't me pressing charges. It was the CPS for the people he'd cut. She didn't care, just walked away, leaving me alone in the pub I'd once called home. I stopped going, stopped answering calls from that crowd. Toby got 2 years. I heard from a friend who still talked to me. After that, he vanished. No calls, no sightings. My old schoolmates, the ones who'd always seen through him, welcomed me back. "Told you he was a nutter," one said, clapping my shoulder. I laughed, but it hurt a sharp pain that lingered. I still listen to black metal sometimes, for nostalgia's sake, but it's different now. The bands I worshipped feel hollow, their darkness, a performance I no longer buy. Music should lift you up, not drag you into the void. But when I close my eyes, I see Toby's face, painted white, twisted with rage, the knife gleaming. I see the forest, the crowd, the blood, and I wonder how close I came to never coming back. In the suffocating silence of a July night, the air trembled with a distant beat. A siren call, drawing me into a trap I couldn't yet see. My reflection in a cracked tent mirror stared back wide-eyed and reckless, as if it knew the darkness waiting beyond the neon horizon. A shiver raced down my spine, a warning I ignored in my hunger for escape. My name is Sarah. And that summer, a few years back, I made a choice that would carve itself into my soul, a decision to attend an EDM festival in the middle of nowhere. A place where music promised ecstasy, but delivered a terror that still haunts my dreams. It was the best and worst moment of my life. A dance with fate I'll never unlearn. The festival sprawled across a desolate stretch of fields, a patchwork of green and brown fading into the endless night, miles from any town or road sign. The landscape was a wild, untamed thing. Tall grasses swaying in the breeze, their tips brushing against the sagging canvas of tents that dotted the horizon like abandoned ships. The ground was uneven, pocked with mud holes from recent rains, and the air carried a heavy mix of damp earth, the faint rot of discarded food, and the metallic tang of rust from old equipment left to decay. This wasn't a polished event. It was a raw, chaotic sprawl organized by a crew of amateurs whose incompetence was whispered in hushed tones by seasoned festival-goers. I'd heard the stories: water taps running dry midday toilets, overflowing into the campsites, attendees wandering lost in the dark after the lights failed. But we were young, our spirits buoyed by the promise of music, and those warnings felt like distant echoes. My friend and I had saved for months, scraping together cash from our dead-end jobs. Me pouring coffee at a run-down cafe, her sorting through moth-eaten clothes at a thrift store, our fingers trembling as we clicked purchase on the online tickets. The screen glowed with our dream, a beacon in the monotony of our small-town lives. The journey out was a blur of anticipation, the car's radio crackling with static as we left civilization behind. We sang off-key to old pop songs, the windows down, to let in the warm summer air, our backpacks stuffed with camping gear that smelled of mildew and hope. The tent we'd borrowed was a faded blue relic, its poles bent from years of use, and the sleeping bags barely zipped over our frames. We packed a cooler with sandwiches, ham and cheese on bread that would soon turn soggy in the heat, and a few bottles of water, laughing about how we'd survive on festival vibes alone. The drive stretched for hours, the road narrowing into a dirt track that jolted us with every bump, the landscape shifting from suburban streets to open fields where the sky seemed to swallow the earth. By the time we arrived, dusk was settling the horizon, a bruise of purple and orange, and the festival's distant beat pulsed like a heartbeat, calling us home. The first night was a revelation, a baptism in sound and light that erased the exhaustion of the journey. As we stepped onto the festival grounds, the air hit us, a thick, humid wave laced with the scent of spilled beer, the earthy musk of trampled grass, and the faint sweetness of perfume from the crowd. Neon lights slashed the sky in violent streaks of purple, blue, and pink, casting eerie shadows that danced with the thousands of bodies swaying in unison. The main stage loomed ahead, a cathedral of steel and lights, its speakers thumping a bass that vibrated through my chest, each drop a shockwave that made my heart skip. I felt weightless, my worries dead-end jobs with managers who barked orders, family arguments that lingered like old wounds, the looming rent that gnawed at my peace, dissolving into the rhythm. My friend and I joined the fray. Our hands raised our voices, lost in the roar, the music a lifeline, pulling us into a shared euphoria. We danced until our legs ached, our clothes soaked with sweat, the ground beneath us a slick mess of mud and crushed plastic cups that crunched underfoot. The DJ's set was a masterpiece, each transition a jolt of adrenaline, each beat a promise of forever. I remember a moment, her laughing, her hair a wild halo under the strobe lights, me spinning until I nearly fell the world, a blur of color and sound, pure, untainted joy that felt like it could last an eternity. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming subtle at first, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The organizer's incompetence was a shadow we couldn't ignore. Lines for water stretched for hours, the taps sputtering with brown, brackish liquid that tasted of rust, and the food stalls offered little beyond overpriced, greasy burgers that sat heavy in our stomachs, their oil leaving a sheen on our lips. The porta potties were a nightmare, overcrowded, reeking of urine and despair, their doors hanging off hinges, forcing us to trek deeper into the fields for privacy, the grass brushing our legs with a cold, wet touch. Rumors swirled like ghosts through the crowd of a girl who'd vanished the year before. Her tent found empty, her phone dead and silent. Of a fight that left someone hospitalized. The medics overwhelmed their sirens. A faint wail in the distance. I brushed them off, chalking it up to festival lore. The kind of tall tales that grow with every retelling. But an unease lingered, a whisper in the back of my mind that refused to be silenced. The night ended with us collapsing into our tent, the fabric sagging around us, our breaths sinking with the fading beats outside. We talked late, our voices soft in the dark, sharing dreams of future festivals, of escaping our small-town lives, where the days blurred into a gray monotony. She spoke of traveling the world, her eyes bright with hope, while I confessed a secret fear of being stuck, of never breaking free. We laughed it off the tent, a cocoon of warmth and dampness, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The second night began with hope, a fragile thread we clung to as we woke to a gray dawn, the air thick with humidity that clung to our skin like a second layer. Our tent was a mess, clothes strewn across the floor, the cooler leaking a puddle of melted ice, and we stretched our muscles sore from the night before the faint ache, a reminder of our abandon. We ate the last of our stale bread, its crust hard against our teeth, and ventured out the festival, stirring to life around us. The main stage loomed ahead, its steel skeleton glinting in the weak sunlight, its promise pulling us forward like a magnet. We planned to dance again, to lose ourselves in the music, to reclaim the joy of the first night. But the air felt different, heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that prickled my skin. The crowd swelled as we approached a sea of faces lit by the neon glow, their laughter a discordant note against the hum of generators. I felt a shiver, a premonition I couldn't name, my stomach tightening as if the ground itself warned me to turn back. My friend nudged me, her grin wide and untroubled, and we plunged into the chaos, ready for another night of freedom, unaware that the darkness was already coiling around us, its claws poised to strike. As we moved deeper into the festival, the sounds grew louder, the thump of bass, the clink of bottles, the murmur of voices rising and falling like waves. The tents around us were a patchwork of colors, some sagging with wear, others adorned with fairy lights that flickered like dying stars. A group nearby played cards on a blanket, their laughter sharp against the music, while a couple argued in hushed tones, their silhouettes tense under a lantern's glow. I noticed the details, the mud caked on someone's boots, the faint smell of weed drifting from a hidden corner, the way the ground vibrated with each beat, each a thread in the tapestry of this strange, wild world. My friend chattered about the DJs. She wanted to see her excitement infectious, but my mind wandered to the stories I'd heard, the warnings I'd dismissed. I thought of my sister, who'd once dragged me to a local concert where a fight broke out, the crowd scattering like frightened birds, and how I'd clung to her hand, my heart racing. That memory lingered a shadow over my anticipation, but I pushed it down, determined to embrace the night. The sun dipped lower, the sky, a canvas of deepening blue, and the festival transformed. Lights flared to life, their colors sharper against the dusk, and the crowd thickened, a living organism pulsing with energy. We reached the main tent, its entrance a gaping maw framed by banners that fluttered in the breeze, and stepped inside the heat and noise enveloping us like a wave. The dance floor was a sea of motion bodies pressed close, their faces illuminated by the strobe lights, some smiling, some lost in their own worlds. My friend grabbed my hand, pulling me into the fray, and we danced our movements, a release of the week's stress, the month's struggles. But as the music swelled, a new sensation crept in, a prickle at the back of my neck, a sense that something was off. I scanned the crowd, my eyes catching on a figure here, a shadow there, but dismissed it as fatigue, as the weight of a long day settling in. Little did I know that feeling was the first whisper of the nightmare, to come a prelude to a night that would test every ounce of my courage. The memories of past festivals flooded back as we moved deeper into the tent. There was that time at a local rave years ago when I was 16, my first taste of freedom, sneaking out with friends, the music, a revelation that drowned out my parents' shouts. The night had ended with a stranger offering me a drink, his smile too wide, and my friend pulling me away. Just in time, her grip a lifeline. I'd laughed it off then, but the lesson stuck. Trust is a currency you spend wisely. Another memory surfaced a summer fair where a drunk guy had stumbled into me, his hands lingering too long, and I'd run my heart pounding to find my sister. Those moments shaped me, built a wall of caution I carried into every crowd, every dark corner. Now as I danced with my friend, that wall trembled a silent warning I couldn't yet decipher. The environment around me grew more vivid. The sticky floor under my sneakers, the press of bodies against my arms, the faint hum of a generator somewhere beyond the stage. The air was a cocktail of sweat perfume and the sharp bite of alcohol, each breath a reminder of the chaos we'd embraced. A group nearby cheered as a dancer leapt into the air, his silhouette a fleeting shadow against the lights, while a girl stumbled, her friends catching her with laughter that rang hollow. The stage loomed larger, its speakers a wall of sound, the DJ a godlike figure bathed in green lasers, his movements hypnotic. I felt the bass in my bones, a rhythm that synced with my heartbeat, but beneath it, a unease grew, a shadow moving through the crowd, a presence I couldn't yet see. My friend twirled oblivious, her joy a stark contrast to the knot tightening in my chest. I thought of home, of the quiet nights in my small apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, my only company. The festival was an escape, a rebellion against that stillness, but it came with a price. I remembered my mother's voice, a warning from years ago. Stay close. Sarah, you never know who's watching, and felt a pang of guilt for ignoring it. The crowd thickened, the heat rising, and I wiped sweat from my brow, my shirt clinging to my skin. My friend shouted something about the next set, her voice lost in the noise, and I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, a storm brewed a premonition that this night would be different, that the music's promise would turn to ash. As we moved toward the center of the tent, the lights flared, the beat dropped, and I let myself surrender, unaware that the darkness was already coiling its claws, ready to strike. Under the pulsating glow of neon, a shadow loomed its breath, a rancid cloud that clawed at my senses, yanking me from the music's embrace into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The air thickened a suffocating shroud as his eyes burned into me, a predator's stare that froze my blood. The second night of the festival had barely begun when the world tilted, a fragile piece shattered by a drunken stranger who turned my joy into a desperate fight for survival. My name is Sarah, and in that crowded tent, a moment of terror unfolded, only to be broken by a stranger named Aaron, a savior whose voice became my lifeline. We were deep in the heart of the main tent, the air a humid soup of body heat and spilled drinks, the floor slick with a sheen of alcohol and mud that reflected the kaleidoscope of lights above. The DJ's set was a torrent of sound, each drop a shockwave that sent the crowd into a frenzied dance, hands raised high, voices raw and ragged, the bass a living entity that pulsed through my veins with every beat. My friend and I were at the center of it. Our movements synced her laughter, a bright thread weaving through the chaos. Her hair, damp with sweat, clung to her forehead, and her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the night. Then she leaned in close, her voice a shout over the relentless noise. "I need a break. Girl stuff." I felt a flicker of concern, a quiet hum beneath the music, and offered to go with her, my hand reaching out instinctively. But she waved me off with a grin, her teeth flashing under the strobe lights. "Stay, Sarah. Keep dancing. I'll be back in 10. I watched her silhouette vanish into the sea of bodies swallowed by the swaying mass, and turned back to the stage, letting the rhythm pull me under. Again, my body swaying to the beat's command. I've never been a stranger to attention. In my 20s, fit from years of pounding the pavement on morning runs and lifting weights at the gym, I've been called pretty enough times to know it's a double-edged sword. Guys notice, their gazes linger, their smiles sharpen into something predatory, and I've built a shield against it. A quick, "I've got a boyfriend," that rolls off my tongue like a reflex, even when it's a lie. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about keeping the night mine, a sanctuary free from the dating game's weight. That night, a couple of guys had already tested the waters, one with a shy grin, offering a glow stick that pulsed with green light. Another with a bold wink, his hand outstretched for a dance. But they'd backed off when I politely shut them down, nodding like gentlemen, their figures fading into the crowd. Then he emerged, a specter rising from the edge of the dance floor, his presence a disruption that sliced through the music's spell. He was a wreck, a living embodiment of chaos, sloppy drunk, his stained white t-shirt clinging to his chest like a wet rag, the fabric yellowed and torn under the armpits streaked with dirt from the festival grounds. His breath hitched with the sour stench of beer and cigarettes, a rancid cloud that assaulted my nose as he lurched closer, his movements unsteady but deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. His eyes bloodshot and glassy, fixed on me with a hunger that made my skin crawl, a stare that stripped away the safety of the crowd and left me exposed. He tried to dance, his hands brushing my waist with a familiarity that sent a shiver of revulsion down my spine. His fingers sticky with some unknown residue. Perhaps beer, perhaps sweat that left a cold trail on my skin. "Come on, babe, loosen up." He slurred his voice, a jagged edge cutting through the music, his breath hot and fetid against my cheek, carrying the bitter tang of stale hops. I stepped back, forcing a tight smile that felt like a mask, and said, "I'm good, thanks. Got a boyfriend." But he didn't flinch. He pressed closer, his grin twisting into a sneer. His teeth yellowed and uneven. "What you too good for me?" Don't be a tease. The tent seemed to shrink the air, thickening with his presence, the music fading into a distant hum as my focus narrowed to him alone. The crowd, once a comforting pulse of life, now pressed against me, trapping me in a cage of bodies that swayed oblivious to my plight. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm that drowned the DJ's beat, each thud a warning bell in my chest, and a primal instinct screamed danger. I scanned for an escape, my eyes darting to the exits, flimsy gaps between swaying figures, guarded by security, too far to reach their flashlights, bobbing like distant stars. The strobe lights flared, casting his shadow, long and menacing across the floor, and I felt the weight of his gaze, a physical pressure that pinned me in place. I waited for his eyes to drift a fleeting moment of distraction as he glanced at a dancer nearby, then darted through the crowd, weaving between sweaty bodies, their elbows jabbing my ribs, their laughter a mocking chorus that echoed in my ears. I burst outside the cool night air, a sharp slap against my flushed skin, a brief reprieve that filled my lungs with a gasp until I heard his voice, slurred and relentless, calling after me. "Hey, where are you going?" "Don't ditch me," I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my pulse a thunderclap that reverberated in my skull. He'd followed me, his silhouette a hulking shadow under the dim festival lights, closing the distance with each unsteady step, his boots crunching on the gravel-strewn path. My mind raced. Run, scream, find help. Images, flashing of past warnings, of a friend grabbed in a club years ago, her screams lost in the din, her wrist red from his grip. Of a cousin who'd escaped a similar encounter, her voice trembling as she recounted the ordeal. I turned ready to bolt my legs, tensing, when another voice sliced through the tension, warm and commanding, a lifeline thrown into the storm. Lisa. Oh, my God, what the hell are you doing here? I spun around, startled, my heart leaping into my throat to see a guy I'd never met. His dark hair curling at the edges, damp with sweat, his eyes sparkling with a playful mischief that felt like a beacon in the darkness. Mom didn't tell me you were back from college, he said, stepping closer, his tone so convincing I almost believed I was Lisa, a name that rolled off his tongue with an ease that startled me. He glanced at the drunk guy, his smile tightening with a protective edge, his shoulders squaring as if preparing for a fight. And who's this? You gonna introduce me, cousin? Cousin. My mind reeled. I'd never seen this guy before. His face a stranger's mask in the flickering light, but his words were a rope tossed to a drowning soul, a lifeline I clung to with desperate hope. I played along, forcing a laugh that trembled at the edges, my voice steadier than I felt a fragile shield against the panic rising in my chest. I don't know him, I said, my eyes flicking to the drunk guy whose sneer faltered, his lips parting in confusion. The stranger. My cousin turned to him, his posture relaxed, but firm, his voice carrying a steel-edged authority. Hey man, I get you were hanging out, but mind if Lisa and I catch up? Been a while, you know? He added with a playful but unyielding tone. You're not hitting on my cousin right in front of me, are you, bro? The words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in humor, and I held my breath, my hands clenching at my sides. The drunk guy blinked, his aggression crumbling like wet paper, his fists unclenching as if the fight drained from him, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the stranger's gaze. He laughed, a sloppy, embarrassed sound that grated against my nerves, and muttered, "Nah, man, just vibing." He offered us awkward fist bumps, his hand shaking the skin rough and calloused, the knuckles scarred from some past brawl. Then stumbled back into the tent, his figure swallowed by the crowd, a shadow fading into the neon haze. I exhaled my knees, weak, my pulse still racing, like a trapped animal, and turned to my savior, my voice cracking with relief. "Thank you," I said, half laughing, half shaking my hands, trembling as I brushed damp hair from my face. That was incredible. "No problem," he said, his grin softening, a warmth in his eyes that eased the knot in my chest, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. Name's Aaron. The cousin tricks, a classic works every time. I chuckled a nervous sound that broke the tension, introducing myself as Lisa before admitting, I'm Sarah, actually my real name. A confession that felt vulnerable in the open air. We stood there, the noise of the festival, a distant hum, the crowd's murmurs blending with the faint crackle of a nearby fire as I explained I was waiting for my friend, who'd been gone too long. Worry gnawed at me. Where is she? And I glanced toward the tents, their shapes blurred in the dim light, my stomach tightening with a fear I couldn't name. Aaron offered to walk me there, a free bodyguard to fend off creeps. His voice calm but firm. I hesitated, my trust, a fragile thread woven from gratitude and doubt, then nodded. Sure, why not a decision that would lead me deeper into the night's unfolding horror, a path I couldn't yet foresee, the memory of past encounters with unwanted attention flooded back as I stood there, my breath still uneven. There was that time at a local bar years ago when a guy had cornered me near the jukebox, his hand brushing my arm, his words slurred and insistent. I'd slipped away, my heart pounding, but the fear lingered a shadow I carried into every crowded space. Another incident surfaced a concert where a drunk fan had grabbed my wrist, his grip tight enough to leave a mark, and I'd yanked free, my voice lost in the noise. Those moments shaped me, built a wall of caution. I leaned on now, my eyes darting to Aaron, assessing him. Was he a savior or another mask? The question gnawed at me, a quiet doubt beneath the gratitude. The environment around us grew more vivid, the sticky floor under my sneakers, the press of bodies against my arms as the crowd pulsed the faint hum of a generator somewhere beyond the stage. The air was a cocktail of sweat perfume and the sharp bite of alcohol, each breath a reminder of the chaos we'd embraced. A group nearby cheered as a dancer leapt into the air, his silhouette a fleeting shadow against the lights, while a girl stumbled, her friends catching her with laughter that rang hollow. The stage loomed larger, its speakers a wall of sound, the DJ a godlike figure bathed in green lasers, his movements hypnotic. I felt the bass in my bones, a rhythm that synced with my heartbeat, but beneath it, an unease grew, a shadow moving through the crowd, a presence I couldn't yet see. My friend's absence weighed on me, her promise to return a thread snapping in the wind, and I wondered if she'd encountered trouble. Her laughter silenced by some unseen threat. Aaron's presence was a contrast, his calm a stark relief against the drunk's aggression. His eyes held a kindness I wanted to trust, but my past whispered caution, urging me to keep my guard up. I thought of my sister, who'd once pulled me from a similar situation, her voice firm as she faced down a leering stranger. That memory steadied me, a reminder of resilience, and I nodded again, stepping closer to Aaron. The crowd shifted, a wave of bodies, parting and closing their faces, a blur of joy and exhaustion. A guy stumbled past his drink, splashing my shoe, and I flinched, the cold liquid a jolt that brought me back to the moment. Aaron's hand hovered near my elbow, a silent offer of support, and I took it, my fingers brushing his, a tentative connection in the chaos. Little did I know this step would lead me into a deeper abyss where the night's dangers would test every boundary of my courage. The night stretched thin, a fragile veil over a brewing storm, as every step with Aaron carried me closer to a fear I couldn't voice. The glint of a water bottle in his hand became a mirror to my doubts, reflecting a terror that clawed at my sanity. Its cold surface, a silent accusation in the dark. My name is Sarah. And that night, at the festival's edge, a simple walk with a stranger named Aaron turned into a descent into paranoia, where trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, and every shadow hid a threat. We stood outside the tent, the neon glow fading behind us, the air cooler, but still heavy with the humidity that clung to my skin like a damp shroud. The crowd's roar softened into a distant murmur, punctuated by the occasional shout or laugh as we began our walk toward my campsite. Aaron's presence was a steady anchor, his calm voice cutting through the chaos as he suggested accompanying me to check on my friend. A free bodyguard, he called it. His tone light but firm. I hesitated, my trust, a fragile thread woven from gratitude for his earlier rescue, yet frayed by the caution etched into me from years of navigating crowded spaces. The memory of my sister's warning, never go off alone with someone you don't know, echoed in my mind, but his eyes held a kindness that eased the nuisht in my chest. Sure, why not? I said, my voice a whisper against the night, a decision that felt like stepping onto a tightrope over an abyss. We moved through the festival, the ground uneven underfoot, littered with crushed cups, cigarette butts, and patches of mud that sucked at my sneakers. The air carried a mix of scents, damp grass, the faint rot of abandoned food, and the sharp bite of smoke from a distant campfire. Each breath a reminder of the wildness we'd embraced. The tents around us were a patchwork of colors, some sagging with wear, their fabric rippling in the breeze, others adorned with fairy lights that flickered like dying stars, casting long shadows that danced with every gust. A group nearby played cards on a blanket, their laughter sharp and discordant, while a couple argued in hushed tones, their silhouettes tense under a lantern's glow. The sounds blended into a symphony of chaos, the thump of bass from the main stage, the clink of bottles, the murmur of voices rising and falling, like waves creating a sensory tapestry that both comforted and unnerved me. Aaron walked beside me. His steps measured his hands in his pockets, and we talked our voices, low against the backdrop of the night. He shared stories of his own festival mishaps, a rained-out rave where he danced in a poncho, the fabric sticking to his skin, and a time he lost his friends in a crowd, only to find them hours later asleep in a ditch. His laughter was easy, a warmth that thawed the edges of my unease, and I found myself opening up, recounting my first festival as a teenager, a muddy mess where I lost my shoes in a puddle, laughing as I danced barefoot the cold earth, a shock against my soles. He'd come with friends, he said, but ditched them to wander, soaking up the vibes. And that's when he saw me, caught in the drunk guy's grip, a damsel he couldn't ignore. I liked him, his humor, his calm, but I kept my guard up, a habit honed by years of dodging unwanted advances. When I mentioned my boyfriend, another lie, a shield I wielded like a weapon, he shrugged a faint smile, playing on his lips. I figured you might be taken. But that's not what I'm about, he said, explaining he was in a complicated relationship. Facebook status. Vibes? I teased, and he laughed, accusing me of insulting my rescuer with a grin that softened the jab. As we passed his tent, a small green dome sagging under the weight of dampness, its zipper half open to reveal a jumble of bags inside. He paused. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice casual, and stepped toward it. My stomach tightened. What if he's not what he seems? Memories flashing of a friend lured into a tent by a nice guy years ago, her escape marked by a bruised wrist and a trembling voice. I watched him, my breath shallow, as he rummaged through a bag, the fabric rustling in the silence. A minute later, he returned with 2 unopened water bottles, their plastic gleaming faintly in the moonlight, and offered me one. The night was humid, the air a suffocating blanket that coated my skin with a sheen of sweat, and my own bottle was nearly empty, its contents warm as bathwater, tasting faintly of plastic and despair. I needed it. My throat was parched, my lips cracked and stinging, but I froze my hand, hovering over the bottle, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Every girl knows the rule. Never take a drink from someone you don't trust with your life. It's the oldest, most tried, and most tested commandment of raving and night-clubbing, a mantra passed down like a sacred text written in the blood of too many cautionary tales. I'd heard them all whispers at school of a girl who woke up in a stranger's car, her memory a blank slate. Warnings from my sister about a friend spiked at a party, her laughter turning to tears. A cousin's near miss at a concert, her drink swapped her escape, a blur of panic. These stories were etched into the collective consciousness of girls like me, a survival guide for nights like this, where the line between fun and danger blurs. I felt the weight of those tales, a heavy chain around my neck, and the second Aaron offered me the water bottle, my instincts screamed, "No." I didn't voice my suspicions. I didn't want to offend him. His kindness, a fragile bridge between us, but I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No thanks, I'm good," I said, my voice tight, my fingers curling around my own bottle as if it were a lifeline. Aaron raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he didn't push. "Suit yourself," he said, tucking the bottle into his pocket, the plastic crinkling softly. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being unfair? But the rule was ironclad, a boundary I couldn't cross, not with a stranger, not in this place. He responded, "Huh, okay. I guess I'll keep it handy if you change your mind." His tone light, but I caught a hint of curiosity, a question unspoken. I remember thinking, I definitely won't be changing my mind about that water anytime soon. The thought, a silent vow as we kept walking. The contradiction gnawed at me. I mistrusted him enough to refuse his water. Yet I was okay with him walking me to my tent, a paradox born of necessity and hope. I didn't make the rules when it comes to keeping safe at events like this. I just followed them, and they'd worked out for me, so far a shield against the predators lurking in the shadows. We continued toward my campsite, the path winding through a maze of tents, their shapes blurred in the dim light, the ground soft and treacherous underfoot. The conversation flowed a lifeline in the growing darkness as we swapped more stories. He spoke of a festival where a storm knocked out the power, leaving thousands in pitch black, the screams a chaotic symphony, and how he'd guided a lost girl to safety, her hand trembling in his. I shared a memory of a beach party where the tide rose too fast, trapping us against the rocks, the salt water stinging my eyes as we laughed through the panic. His company was a comfort, his voice a steady rhythm against the night's unease, and I found myself relaxing the tension in my shoulders, easing. But the water bottle in his pocket haunted me. Its presence, a silent accusation, a symbol of the trust I couldn't yet give. I thought of my friend still missing, and the worry sharpened a blade against my calm, urging me to hurry. The campsite came into view, a cluster of tents nestled among the trees, their outlines softened by the moonlight filtering through the branches. The air grew cooler, the scent of pine mixing with the festival's chaos, and I felt a flicker of relief. She's there. She has to be. But the doubt lingered a shadow over my hope as Aaron's steps echoed beside me, his breath visible in the chill. The water bottle gleamed again as he adjusted his pocket, and my mind raced. What if he's waiting for the right moment? The thought was a poison seeping into my thoughts, turning his kindness into a mask. I pushed it down, focusing on the crunch of gravel, the distant thump of bass. But the unease grew a quiet storm building inside me, a premonition of the terror to come. The past crept into my thoughts as we walked a gallery of moments where trust had faltered. There was that time at a friend's house party years ago when a guy offered me a drink, his smile too wide, his hand lingering on the glass. I'd refused, watching him shrug and move on. But the unease lingered, a seed of doubt that grew with every retelling. Another memory surfaced, a college night where a classmate slipped something into a punch bowl, the room spinning for those who drank their laughter, turning to confusion. I'd stayed sober, my suspicion a shield, and helped them to safety, their gratitude a bitter reward. Those experiences shaped me, built a wall of caution I carried, now my eyes darting to Aaron, assessing every move. Was he a friend or a foe? The question gnawed at me, a quiet doubt beneath the gratitude. The environment around us grew more vivid, the sticky mud clinging to my shoes, the press of damp air against my skin, the faint hum of a generator somewhere beyond the trees. The air was a cocktail of pine sweat and the sharp tang of spilled liquor, each breath a reminder of the wildness we navigated. A tent nearby glowed with candlelight, its occupants singing off-key, their voices a discordant note, while a dog barked in the distance, its sound swallowed by the night. The ground sloped gently, dotted with twisted roots and patches of wet grass that brushed my legs, a cold touch that sent shivers up my spine. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows that danced like specters, and the silence pressed against my ears, amplifying every rustle, every snap of a twig. Aaron's voice broke the quiet, his story of a lost festival night, a distraction, but my mind wandered to the water bottle, its plastic a silent threat, in the dark. My emotions churned a tempest of relief and fear. Relief that he'd saved me from the drunk, that his presence offered a shield against the night's dangers. But fear that his kindness hid a darker intent. I thought of my mother's voice, a warning from childhood. Watch who you trust, Sarah, and felt a pang of guilt for ignoring it. The water bottle gleamed again as he shifted, and my heart raced a drumbeat of panic. What if it's waste? The thought was a knife slicing through my calm, turning his smile into a mask, his offer into a trap. I gripped my own bottle. Tighter, its warmth a comfort, and forced a nod, my voice steady, despite the storm inside. Almost there. I said my eyes on the tents ahead, but the doubt lingered a shadow over my hope, a prelude to the nightmare that would unfold. The ground beneath my feet seemed to dissolve, a treacherous abyss, opening as a wave of nausea crashed over me, its icy fingers tightening around my throat. The night air grew thick, a suffocating veil, as the realization dawned. Something was wrong, and the water I'd sipped held a secret that turned my trust to ash. My name is Sarah, and in the quiet shadows of the festival's edge, a simple drink unleashed a terror that gripped my soul, forcing me to confront a fear I'd buried deep, only to find redemption in its aftermath. We reached the outskirts of my campsite. The tents nestled among the trees, like silent sentinels, their outlines softened by the moonlight filtering through the branches. The air had grown cooler, a faint breeze carrying the scent of pine and the distant tang of smoke from the festival's fading fires. My heart still thrummed from the encounter with the drunk guy, Aaron's presence, a steadying force beside me. His calm voice, a contrast to the chaos we'd left behind. We'd been walking and talking for over an hour, the conversation a lifeline that wove through the night's unease. His tales of lost festival nights, my memories of muddy dances, a fragile bond forming between us. But as we traced the edge of the site, the lights dimming and the music dulling to a distant hum, a new sensation crept in, a shadow that slithered into my awareness with cold, relentless intent. It started as a faint dizziness, a subtle tilt of the world that I attributed to the long day, the heat, the dancing, the adrenaline still coursing through me. My legs felt heavy, each step a struggle against an unseen pull, and my vision blurred at the edges, the trees and tents merging into a hazy smear. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the motion only worsened the sensation, a wave of nausea rising like a tide in my stomach, sour and insistent. My hands trembled, the half-empty water bottle in my grip, slipping slightly, its warmth a mocking comfort against my clammy skin. I'd asked for Aaron's second bottle earlier, my caution crumbling under the humidity, and his easy charm, the cool liquid, a brief relief as it slid down my throat. Now, halfway through it, my body rebelled, a churning knot twisting tighter with each breath, and a cold realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The water, had he spiked it? The thought was a knife, slicing through the trust I'd begun to build, turning his kindness into a mask, his smile into a predator's lure. My mind raced images, flashing of warnings. I'd heard girls waking in strange tents, their memories fractured, their bodies violated. A friend's story of a spiked drink at a party, her laughter turning to tears as the room spun. The rule I'd clung to, never take a drink from someone you don't trust with your life, echoed in my head, a mantra I'd broken, and now I paid the price. I didn't tell him what I suspected. I couldn't, the words trapped in my throat. But I mumbled, I need to get back, my voice, a strained whisper, and started walking quickly toward the lit areas, my legs unsteady, my breath shallow. The ground tilted beneath me, the roots and mud a treacherous maze, and I gripped a tree for support, its bark rough against my palm, the texture grounding me for a fleeting moment. Aaron followed his footsteps, a soft echo behind me, his voice cutting through the fog. "You okay?" he asked, concern lacing his tone, but it felt distant, as if he were underwater. His words distorted by the panic flooding my mind. My legs faltered, the nausea surging, a bitter taste coating my tongue, and I knew I have to act now. Empty your stomach now, a command from deep within, urgent and unyielding. I veered toward the tree line, the shadows swallowing me, the branches clawing at my arms, and barked, "Don't follow me." My voice raw, a desperate plea to protect what little control I had left. I stumbled into the darkness, the ground soft and yielding under my knees, and shoved my fingers down my throat, the act a violation of my own body, a surrender to the fear that gripped me. I retched the sound raw and guttural, a primal cry that tore from my chest, my stomach heaving as the contents spilled onto the earth. The first wave was a rush of warm liquid, the taste of the water mixed with bile, and the greasy remnants of a burger I'd eaten hours ago, its oil a bitter memory on my tongue. The second came harder, a violent expulsion that left me gasping. My hands braced against the ground, the mud cold and slick between my fingers. I kept going, my body trembling until nothing remained but a trickle of bile, a sour sting that burned my throat, my vision swimming with tears and sweat. The effort drained me, my arms shaking my breath, a ragged rasp, and I leaned against the tree, its roughness a stark contrast to the softness of my collapse. I wiped my face with a trembling hand, the cool night air stinging my skin, and as the fog in my head began to clear, a new fear replaced the old one. It wasn't drugs. The realization hit like a wave, washing away the panic, but leaving a residue of shame. My head steadied, the dizziness fading, and I recognized the signs, the cheap booze from the vendor's stall, the greasy burger that had sat heavy in my gut, the heat sapping my strength. Almost as soon as I purged, I felt a shift, a lightness returning to my limbs, the nausea retreating like a defeated foe. But with it came a mix of emotions, dumb for misjudging Aaron, mean for the suspicion that had tainted his kindness, and paranoid for letting my fears spiral out of control. I didn't know how to explain it, the turmoil a storm within me, and I stood there, my legs weak, my face flushed with embarrassment, the night air a cold caress against my damp skin. I stumbled back toward Aaron, my steps hesitant, my mind a battlefield of guilt and relief. He waited where I'd left him, his figure a silhouette against the faint glow of the tents, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, a question that carried a weight I couldn't ignore. My throat tightened, the words a struggle to form, and I told him straight up, my voice raw and trembling. I was so terrified of being spiked that the second I felt unwell, I assumed it was your fault. I thought you were some predator who played the long game, tricking me into drugging myself. I'm so sorry. I feel like a psycho for even thinking it. The confession spilled out. A floodgate opened, and I braced for anger, for him to turn and walk away, my heart sinking with the weight of my mistake. But Aaron didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes soft, a faint bruise on his cheek from an earlier bump catching the moonlight. "I get it," he said, his voice steady, a calm in the storm. "All those crime docs you love? Mindhunter, the keepers, they'd make anyone paranoid. I'd be scared too if I heard those stories, non-stop." His words were a balm, acknowledging my fear without judgment, and he teased, "You owe me a real date for ruining this one with your accusations." His grin a flicker of humor that eased the tension. I laughed, a shaky sound that broke the silence, the relief washing over me like a tide, and I agreed the idea of a second chance, a lifeline in the darkness. For the first time, I felt a spark, something real, something fragile, a thread of connection that promised hope amid the night's horrors. The past resurfaced as I stood there, my breath still uneven, a gallery of moments where my suspicions had led me astray. There was that time at a friend's birthday years ago when I accused a classmate of tampering with the punch, my voice sharp with panic, only to learn it was just bad mixology, his hurt expression haunting me for weeks. Another memory flickered a camping trip where I mistrusted a guide, convinced he'd poisoned our water. My accusations met with laughter and a clean test, leaving me red-faced and isolated. Those experiences shaped me, built a wall of caution that sometimes toppled into paranoia. And now with Aaron, I felt the weight of that legacy, a shame that burned hotter than the nausea. I thought of my father, his gentle rebuke after a similar mistake. Trust your gut, but don't let it blind you, Sarah, and felt a pang of regret for letting fear dictate my actions. The environment around me grew more vivid. The cold mud clinging to my knees, the press of damp air against my flushed skin, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The air was a cocktail of pine, the sour tang of my vomit, and the distant scent of campfire smoke, each breath a reminder of the wildness I navigated. The trees loomed taller, their branches a canopy that filtered the moonlight into dappled patterns on the ground, the shadows dancing like specters. The silence pressed against my ears, amplifying every sound, the drip of water from a leaf, the distant thump of bass, the soft crunch of Aaron's footsteps as he approached. The ground was soft, yielding under my weight, and I felt the chill seep through my jeans, a stark contrast to the heat of my shame. The tent outlines glowed faintly, their fabric rippling in the wind, a promise of safety I longed to reach. My emotions churned a tempest of relief and guilt. Relief that Aaron wasn't the monster I'd imagined, that my body had purged the source of my fear, but guilt for the suspicion that had tainted his kindness, turning a savior into a suspect. I thought of my sister, who'd once laughed off my paranoia at a fair, her reassurance a steady hand on my shoulder, and wished for her presence now. The water bottle lay discarded near the tree, its plastic glinting mockingly, and I kicked it away, the act a release of my anger at myself. Aaron's understanding deepened, the shame his acceptance a mirror to my flaws, but it also sparked hope. A chance to rebuild trust, to turn this night into something more. I wiped my eyes, the tears mixing with sweat, and nodded, my voice steadier. A date it is, I said, a smile breaking through a fragile bridge to the future, unaware that the night's dangers were far from over. The night shattered like glass, a sudden crack of violence ripping through the fragile calm as a shadow from my past lunged from the darkness. his rage a storm that drowned the stars. The air thickened with dread, a suffocating weight, as his fist descended a harbinger of chaos I couldn't outrun. My name is Sarah, and in the quiet edge of that festival, a drunken monster returned to claim his vengeance, turning a moment of hope into a brutal fight for survival, saved only by the hands of strangers who rose from the night. The air hung heavy around us, the campsite a haven of muted sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant thump of bass from the festival's heart, the soft murmur of tent dwellers settling in. It was 02:23 p.m. plus 07 on Monday, July 14th, 2025. A timestamp etched into my memory, though the night felt timeless, a void where seconds stretched into eternity. Aaron and I stood close, the tension of my earlier paranoia easing into a tentative warmth, his teasing promise of a date, a fragile bridge to a future I dared to imagine. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground, and the cool breeze carried the scent of pine and the faint tang of my recent purge, a bitter reminder of my misjudgment. I felt a flicker of relief, my body steadier after the nausea, my mind clearing as I leaned into the hope of his understanding. But that hope was a candle in a gale, snuffed out by the sudden appearance of a figure I'd prayed to never see again. He emerged from the shadows, a hulking silhouette that staggered into the faint glow of a nearby lantern. The drunk guy from the tent, his stained white t-shirt now torn at the shoulder, his face a mask of rage and intoxication, his eyes bloodshot and wild, locked onto me, a predator's stare that reignited the fear I'd felt hours before. He'd heard Aaron use my real name, his ears catching the word date like a trigger. And now he lumbered toward us, his boots crunching on the gravel-strewn path, his breath a rancid cloud of beer and fury. "You ain't no cousin," he spat his words, slurring into a venomous hiss, his lips curling back to reveal yellowed teeth. "Think I'm stupid. Think you're better than me." His voice rose a drunken roar that shattered the night's quiet, and my heart stopped, a cold weight settling in my chest. Aaron turned his body, tensing, but before he could speak, the guy's fist flew a blur of motion that connected with Aaron's face in a sickening crack that reverberated through the air. The sound was grotesque, a wet, brutal slap that echoed in my skull like flesh meeting flesh with a force that defied the night's stillness. Aaron crumpled his body, hitting the ground with a dull thud, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes closed, his face a mask of shock and pain. I screamed my voice, a raw primal cry lost in the void, the sound tearing from my throat as terror seized me. The guy loomed over him, his sneaker pressing down on Aaron's head, the sole grinding into his hair, and he leaned his weight forward, a deliberate act to crush his intent, clear in the glint of his eyes. He's going to kill him. The thought, a lightning bolt that galvanized me into action. I lunged my body, moving before my mind could catch up, my hands slamming into his chest with all the strength I could muster. The fabric of his shirt was slick with sweat, the stench of alcohol overwhelming, as I shoved my voice breaking into a scream. "Get off him!" He staggered his balance, thrown by the alcohol, but turned on me, his fist swinging in a wild arc. The impact hit my nose, a white-hot explosion of pain that radiated through my skull. Blood gushing down my chin, warm and sticky against my skin. I stumbled back, my vision swimming, the world tilting as I touched my face, my fingers coming away red. The sight, a shock that rooted me to the spot. The distraction cost me too late, and I saw him drop to his knees, his fists pounding Aaron's face. Each blow a dull, sickening thud that shook the ground beneath me. Aaron was defenseless, his body limp, and I knew with a chilling certainty that this was no fight. It was murder in the making. Adrenaline surged, drowning the pain, my fear morphing into a feral rage that burned through my veins. I charged again, tackling him with a force I didn't know. I possessed my fists, flying in a blur of desperation. I landed a hit on his cheek, the impact jarring my knuckles, the skin splitting under the force, and another on his jaw, the crack of bone against bone, a grim satisfaction. Each blow was a release of terror and fury. The sound of my breaths ragged in my ears. But he was stronger, his bulk pinning me down for a moment, his weight a crushing force. I twisted free, my nails raking his arm, leaving red welts, and scrambled to my feet, my nose throbbing with every heartbeat, the blood a steady drip onto the ground. His hand closed around my throat, his fingers digging into my skin, the pressure a vice that cut off my air, the world narrowing to a pinprick. I clawed at him, my nails breaking my vision, darkening when a shout pierced the haze. "What the hell's wrong with you?" The pressure vanished, and I fell, gasping my hands to my throat, the air rushing back in a painful flood. 5 or 6 figures emerged from the tents nearby, their faces a blur of anger and resolve, their voices a chorus of outrage. "You're hitting a girl, bro. What is wrong with you?" One yelled, his tone a mix of disbelief and fury, his silhouette tall against the moonlight. They swarmed, pulling the drunk guy off their hands, a tangle of motion pinning him to the ground. One locked his arm in a judo hold, twisting it with a sickening pop, the guy howling in pain, his body collapsing into the mud as he writhed, his strength sapped by the alcohol and the hold. The scene was chaos, a whirlwind of shouts and movement. The ground churned into a mess of dirt and blood. I collapsed. My breath, a ragged rasp, my face slick with blood and sweat, my nose a pulsing agony that blurred my vision. Security arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark like blades, their shouts a chaotic symphony that drowned the night's murmurs. Back off. Get back. They barked their boots, pounding the earth, their vests glinting under the beams. Medics followed their voices, calm but urgent, rushing to Aaron as he stirred his face, a mask of cuts and bruises, blood pooling under his nose. His eyebrow split, his lip swollen. They knelt beside him, their hands steady as they assessed the damage, while I sat, my hands shaking, my shirt stained with my own blood, the cold seeping into my bones. The drunk guy was dragged away, his curses fading into the distance, his body limp in the security's grip, a defeated beast. I watched my heart, a drumbeat of fear and relief, as the medics worked their flashlights, casting stark shadows across Aaron's face. His eyes fluttered open, a groan escaping his lips, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the strangers who'd intervened their bravery, a lifeline I hadn't expected. The scene unfolded like a dream, the tents around us, a silent audience, their occupants peering out their whispers, a soft undertone. The medics lifted Aaron, supporting his weight, and I followed my legs unsteady, my mind reeling from the violence that had erupted so suddenly. The night, once a promise of freedom, had turned into a battlefield, and I knew this was only the beginning of the scars it would leave. The past surged forward. As I sat there, my breath still uneven, a gallery of moments where violence had brushed my life. There was that time at a high school football game years ago when a fight broke out in the stands, fists flying, a girl screaming as she was pushed to the ground. My brother pulling me away, his arm a shield, the chaos, a blur of shouts and sirens. Another memory flickered, a bar brawl where a friend was caught in the crossfire. Her arm bruised, her eyes wide with terror as I helped her escape the smell of blood and beer, lingering for days. Those experiences shaped me, built a resilience I leaned on now, my hands trembling as I watched Aaron, the fear of losing him, a knife in my gut. I thought of my mother, her voice steady after a neighborhood dispute. Stay strong. Sarah, and felt a surge of determination to hold on. The environment around me grew more vivid, the cold mud caking my knees, the press of damp air against my blood-streaked face, the faint tang of iron mixing with the pine's scent. The air was a cocktail of sweat, the sour reek of the drunk guy's breath, and the sharp bite of torn grass. Each breath a reminder of the violence we'd endured. The trees loomed taller, their branches a canopy that filtered the moonlight into jagged patterns, the shadows dancing like wraiths. The silence was broken by the medic's murmurs, the crunch of boots, the soft whimper from Aaron as they moved him, each sound a thread in the tapestry of survival. The ground was churned a mess of dirt and blood, and I felt the chill seep through my jeans, a stark contrast to the heat of my rage and fear. The tent outlines glowed faintly, their fabric rippling, a promise of safety I longed to reclaim. My emotions churned a tempest of terror and gratitude. Terror at the drunk guy's brutality, the image of his sneaker on Aaron's head seared into my mind, a nightmare I'd relive in the dark. Gratitude for the strangers, their voices a chorus of hope, their hands a shield against the chaos, their courage a mirror to my own. I thought of my sister, who'd once faced down a bully for me. Her fist raised her resolve unshakable, and felt a kinship with these unknown heroes. The blood on my hands, warm and sticky, was a badge of my fight, and the pain in my nose a reminder of my defiance. Aaron's groan pulled me back, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of recognition that steadied me, and I nodded, my voice a whisper. "You're okay," I said, a promise to us both, unaware that the night's wounds would linger long after the medics left. The silence that followed was a hollow echo, a void where the night's violence lingered like a ghost, its cold breath brushing my skin as I stared at Aaron's bruised face, a testament to a bond forged in blood. The dawn crept closer, a fragile light that promised healing but couldn't erase the scars etched into my soul. My name is Sarah, and in the aftermath of that brutal festival night, a connection with Aaron emerged from the ashes of fear, a relationship tempered by survival, its roots sinking deep into a memory I'll never outrun. The medical tent was a stark contrast to the chaos outside its white canvas walls, glowing faintly under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the air thick with the antiseptic scent of bandages and the faint metallic tang of blood. It was nearly 3:30 a.m. The clock on the medic's table, a silent witness to the hours that had unraveled its hands, ticking past the moment when the drunk guy's fist had changed everything. I sat on a folding chair, my hands trembling, my shirt stained with dried blood from my nose, the throbbing pain, a dull ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. Aaron lay on a cot, his face a map of bruises, his nose swollen and crusted with blood, his eyebrow split a gash that wept red, his lip puffed and discolored. The medics moved around him, their voices a low hum of urgency, their hands steady as they cleaned his wounds with gauze soaked in stinging solution. The sharp smell cutting through the tense, sterile air. I watched my breath, a ragged rasp, as they worked their flashlights, casting stark shadows across his face, the light catching the glint of sweat on his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, a groan escaping his lips, a sound that twisted my gut with guilt and relief. You're okay, I whispered, my voice a fragile thread leaning closer to offer comfort, my hand hovering near his, unsure if touch would hurt or heal. The medics checked for concussions, their fingers probing his skull, their questions. Can you follow my finger? What's your name? A routine that steadied the chaos in my mind. He nodded weakly, his voice hoarse. Aaron, and met my gaze, a flicker of recognition that steadied me, a silent promise that he'd pull through. They bandaged his eyebrow, the white strip stark against his skin, and applied ice to his nose, the crunch of the pack, a soft counterpoint to the tense hum. Outside, the festival's pulse had faded, the bass a distant memory, replaced by the murmur of security, coordinating with police, their radios crackling with static, the occasional shout piercing the night. The drunk guy was gone, hauled away in handcuffs, his curses a fading echo, his body limp in the grip of officers whose faces were grim under their caps. The group of strangers who'd intervened had dispersed their silhouettes, vanishing into the tents, their bravery, a fleeting light in my memory. I thought of them, 5 or 6 faces, blurred by adrenaline, their voices a chorus of outrage, their hands a shield, and felt a gratitude that burned through the fear, a debt I couldn't repay. The medics finished advising Aaron to rest and seek further care, their clipboard notes a formality in the face of his resilience. Aaron sat up, wincing his hand, brushing mine, a tentative connection that sent a shiver through me. I need to call my brother, he said, his voice strained, and pulled out his phone, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. He dialed repeatedly, the ringtone a monotonous drone, each unanswered call tightening the knot in my chest. He's not picking up, he muttered, frustration etching his features. But after the fifth try, a groggy voice answered the brother's irritation, clear. "What the hell? Aaron," he snapped. But the moment Aaron described his injuries, blood bruises, the attack, the tone shifted, urgency replacing sleep. "I'm coming," he promised, the line clicking off a vow that echoed in the tense silence. We waited together on the dirt road leading to the site. The ground cold and hard under us, the air growing crisp as dawn approached the sky, a bruise of purple and gray. His brother arrived within the hour, a tall figure emerging from the headlights' glare, his face a storm of fury and relief as he saw Aaron's state. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice rough, and I explained my words, stumbling over the violence. The drunk guy's return, the punches, the stranger's intervention, each detail a weight I couldn't shake. They argued briefly, Aaron insisting he was fine, his brother insisting on a hospital. The tension a crackle in the air. We swapped numbers, my fingers shaky as I typed his into my phone, a napkin with his scribbled digits, a tangible link to this night. They drove off the tail lights, fading into the dawn, and I stood alone, the silence pressing against me, the festival's remnants, a ghostly outline in the distance. The next day, the ride back was a blur, the car's hum, a lullaby against my exhaustion, my face bruised and swollen, my nose tender to the touch. I spent almost the whole journey texting Aaron, our messages, a lifeline, his updates on his recovery, my apologies for the night's terror, our plans for that promised date. Each ping of my phone was a beat of hope, a rhythm that rebuilt what the night had broken. We met a week later, a quiet cafe replacing the festival's chaos, his bruises fading my scars hidden beneath makeup. The date was awkward at first, the memory of blood and fists a shadow between us, but his laugh, his gentle tease, careful might be laced, as he handed me coffee, dissolved the tension, a humor that mirrored our survival. That night was a crucible, forging a bond that grew stronger with time. Aaron became my longest relationship, 3 years, and counting a partnership tempered by the violence we'd endured. We'd sit on his couch, the TV flickering with crime docs I loved, and he'd joke about my paranoia, his hand in mine, a steady anchor. He'd bring me coffee, his grin widening with the familiar line, and I'd take it on the chin, the sting of the past, a reminder of its cost. Trust was hard won, a treasure carved from the darkest nights, and nothing worth having came easy. I thought of the festival often, the neon lights, the drunk guy's sneer, the stranger's courage, each memory a thread in the tapestry of our love. The scars remained physical on my nose, emotional in my dreams, but they were ours, a shared history that bound us, a testament to a night that changed everything. The past unfurled as I sat with Aaron that first post-festival week, a gallery of relationships that had shaped my wariness. There was that high school boyfriend, sweet but clingy, his jealousy, a chain that broke us apart. His final words, "You're too guarded," a sting I carried. Another flickered a college fling, his charm fading into control. My exit, a quiet rebellion, the memory of his anger, a shadow. I shook off. Those experiences built my walls, taught me to question, to protect. And now, with Aaron, I felt the weight of that legacy lift, replaced by a trust earned through blood. I thought of my mother, her steady love after my father's departure, her advice. Love takes time. Sarah, and saw it reflected in Aaron's patience. The environment around us grew more vivid. The cold dirt road under my feet, the press of dawn air against my bruised face, the faint scent of dew mixing with the lingering blood. The air was a cocktail of earth, the sharp tang of antiseptic from the tent, and the soft musk of pine, each breath a reminder of the night's trials. The sky lightened the stars, fading into a gray wash, the trees a silent audience to our weight, their branches swaying gently. The silence was broken by the car's engine, the crunch of tires, the soft groan from Aaron as he shifted each sound, a thread in the tapestry of survival. The tent outlines glowed faintly, their fabric rippling a promise of safety I'd reclaimed, and the road stretched ahead, a path to healing I longed to follow. My emotions churned a tempest of relief and reflection. Relief that Aaron survived, that the night's violence had an end, but reflection on its cost, the fear, the blood, the stranger's sacrifice. I thought of my sister, her strength a beacon after a fight she'd faced for me, and felt a kinship with those who'd saved us. The blood on my hands, now dry and flaking, was a badge of my fight, and the pain in my nose a reminder of my defiance. Aaron's texts, each word a promise, deepened my hope, his humor a light in the dark. I wiped a tear, the salt mixing with sweat, and smiled, my voice a whisper. "We made it," I said, a vow to us both. The scars, a bond that would endure, a love born from the night's crucible. My chest tightened as the crowd surged 1,000 bodies, crushing me against strangers, their sweat soaking my shirt. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream. Somewhere in the chaos, a girl's cry pierced the air. Not excitement, but terror. Rage Against the Machine's guitars roared, but the real danger wasn't the music. It was the sea of people ready to swallow us whole. I was Ben, 20 years old, and in that moment, I thought I'd die at Leeds Festival, 2008, chasing a dream that turned into a nightmare. The summer of 2008 burned with possibility. I was a lanky kid from a nowhere town, my walls plastered with posters of Rage Against the Machine, their fists raised against a world I didn't yet understand. Their music was my rebellion, my escape. I'd been 12 when I first saw Sleep Now in the fire on a grainy TV screen. Zach De La Rocha's voice spitting truth into my teenage soul. But Rage broke up in 2001, and I buried my dream of seeing them live, thinking it was lost forever. Then in 2007, whispers of a reunion sparked hope. When Leeds Festival announced their 2008 lineup, Slipknot, Metallica, and God Help Me, Rage Against the Machine, I clawed my way to a ticket. My mates Danny, Tom, and Chris did the same. We were ready to live the music that defined us. Getting to Leeds was half the adventure. Chris's dad, a gruff bloke with a builder's van, agreed to drive us. Not in a cozy minibus, mind you, but a rattling white van with no seats, just a metal floor in the back. We piled in laughing as we slid across the cold steel, with every turn our camping gear bouncing around us. It was illegal as hell, but at 20, that only made it cooler. We felt like outlaws smuggled into a festival that promised 3 days of freedom. The air buzzed with anticipation as we rolled into the fields of Bramham Park, tents sprawling like a chaotic village under a gray Yorkshire sky. Day one was a blur of adrenaline. We caught Dropkick Murphys' rowdy anthems, Feeder's slick riffs, and Tenacious D's absurd genius. Metallica closed the night, their riffs shaking the earth. Slipknot, though, was a no-show Joey Jordison. Their drumming legend pulled out for health reasons, and we mourned that loss over cheap beers back at our tent. Still, the real prize was Saturday, Queens of the Stone Age and Rage Against the Machine. We woke up hungover, but electric, our blood pumping for the bands we'd come to worship. The festival pulsed around us. Laughter, spilled drinks, the distant thrum of bass. We drifted from stage to stage, saving our energy for the main event. As Queens of the Stone Age tore through their set, the crowd swelled. Thousands had come for Rage, their reformation, a once-in-a-lifetime draw. We wove through the masses, not shoving, just slipping between groups until we were close enough to see the stage's edge. The air was thick with sweat and anticipation. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't uncomfortable, not yet. Festivals are like that. Personal space is a myth, and you lean into it. But as rage took the stage, bulls on parade, exploding from the speakers, the crowd lost its mind. People jumped, screamed, surged forward. For a moment, it felt alive, electric. Then the second song started, and everything changed. The crowd didn't move. It consumed. Bodies slammed into me from every side, a wall of flesh I couldn't escape. My ribs ached as elbows dug into my sides, my lungs struggling against the weight. I tried to push back, but there was nowhere to go. Tom, the least obsessed with rage, saw it coming. "I'm out," he muttered, slipping away before the crush tightened. The rest of us stayed naive, thinking it couldn't get worse. But it did. A girl's scream cut through the music, not a cheer, but raw panic. I craned my neck and saw her, maybe 18, clutching her friend, who'd gone limp. They were in the mosh pit, a churning vortex of bodies. People slammed into them, oblivious as the girl begged for help. A guy tried to pull them up, but the crowd swallowed his efforts. I wanted to help, but I couldn't move. The crush was suffocating now, my breath shallow, my vision blurring. My feet barely touched the ground as the crowd carried me. "You need to get out," my mind screamed, but my body was trapped. I saw others struggling, faces, pale eyes, wide with fear. Up front, people were pinned against the metal barriers, their bodies contorted, gasping. Security scrambled, shoving back the crowd, dragging out those who'd passed out. I lost Danny and Chris in the chaos, their faces vanishing as the crowd churned. The helplessness was worse than the pain. I wasn't just fighting for air. I was fighting the realization that I might not make it out. Then a miracle. Rage stopped playing. Zach De La Rocha's voice boomed calm but commanding. "Stop! Turn on the lights!" The stage blazed, exposing the horror. Hundreds of us packed like cattle faces, twisted in panic. The music died, and for a moment, the crowd stilled. Security shouted, pulling more people over the barriers. The pressure eased just enough for me to gulp air. "Move now," I told myself. I shoved forward, not caring who I pushed. A guy swore at me, but another, a stranger with a shaved head, patted my back, his eyes saying he knew. I was in survival mode, my dream of seeing rage shattered. I'd waited years for this, but no band was worth my life. I stumbled to a gap near a secondary barrier where people were streaming back to their tents. My hands shook. as I leaned against the metal, scanning for my friends. The crowd had spit us out in different directions, and I didn't know if they were safe. What if Danny's one of those being dragged out? The thought clawed at me. Rage resumed playing their sound, distant now. But I didn't care. I stood there, heart pounding, until I saw Chris, his face pale but alive. We hugged, no words needed. Tom appeared next, shaken, but unharmed. Then Danny limped toward us, and my stomach dropped. His cheek was a mess, a raw red scrape, half burn, half wound, like a boot had smashed into his face and slid off. He'd fallen in the pit, trampled, before he could crawl out. We took Danny to the medical tent, where a nurse cleaned his wound and checked for concussion. He was lucky, she said, but the word felt hollow. Back at our tent, we cracked beers, trying to drown the fear. The show we'd dreamed of had lasted 3 minutes before turning into a nightmare. We barely spoke about it, as if silence could erase the trauma. The next day, we wandered the festival, catching a band here and there. But the joy was gone. We were just killing time, pretending we weren't shaken. It wasn't until we got home that the truth hit. Friends told us about the crush, how some people had been hospitalized. Ribs cracked, lungs starved. We'd been lucky, but luck wasn't a plan. If rage hadn't stopped the show, if we'd been closer to the stage, I might not be telling this story. Looking back, I see the naivety in thinking it couldn't happen to us. Festivals are chaos, but we'd bought into the myth of invincibility. The memory of that crush lingers a weight I carry when I hear about tragedies like Astro World. Music is supposed to unite, to lift, but that night it nearly killed us. I still love Rage Against the Machine, but I've never chased a stage since. Some dreams aren't worth the cost.